Alrighty, this is the Securing Tomorrow podcast, episode 2 with Andrew Betts, brought to you in part by Bickling Financial Services. My name is Jack Freedman. I am your host, certified financial planner at Bickling Financial Services, as well as the head of the investment committee. The goal of the podcast is to empower our clients through education, helping them understand the why behind each decision so they can invest with confidence. By cutting through the noise and avoiding the pull of short-term trends, we stay focused on what truly matters, investing with clarity, conviction, and care. The Securing Tomorrow podcast has many topics, and in each episode, we'll bring the best and the brightest folks I work with to you with the common segments: pros ask pros, many misconceptions, horrible headlines, and intelligence that isn't artificial. And today with me, I have my boss, Andrew Betts. He is the owner and CFO of Bickling Financial Services. He has his bachelor's in chemical engineering, biomedical engineering from Carnegie Mellon, and MBA from Babson College. He was a production engineer at SciTech Industries, making sulfuric acid, ammonia, and steam. He was also the director of operations and finance at Traveling Vineyard, which hopefully we'll get to a little bit about
Sure.
that. And then he also has a puppy. You're a self-proclaimed pretty good cook, I've heard. And you play soccer across Europe when Chernobyl exploded and continues to play today.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming on the podcast.
Sure. Thanks. So you wanted to know sort of how this all started, this whole career path of mine. We can kind of jump into that. I'm a certified financial planner. I'm one of the partners here. My mother started the business. I joined her in 2007, about 7 years after my brother had joined the practice. Career path started as a chemical engineer. I worked for a company that was called American Cyanamid. The chemicals division got spun out of American Cyanamid, and it was called SciTech. So right outside of New Orleans, and I started out as an engineer in the ammonia production facility. We made 1,300 tons of ammonia a day. That's 13 rail cars or one barge every day. And then I moved on to be what's called the utility engineer there, where I worked on river water. We take water out of the Mississippi River to make potable water and steam. And so that was part of my responsibility. I also helped work on the plant-wide refrigerated ammonia. The plant was 350 acres, about 700 employees with 8 operating units. And so we made refrigerated ammonia. We made instrument air. That's low pressure air that goes all over the facility for instrumentation use. When you compress it, it's mildly compressed. You could introduce water. We have to get water out and dry it anyway. We did a major project with drying air, and then steam. I ran 200,000 pound per hour boilers, and then I went on to work at the sulfuric acid production facility where we made 2,000 tons of sulfuric acid a day. That's 20 rail cars, or about a tanker every 2 weeks. So, I worked there for 5 years, and I moved on from the operations and production to an inside sales role, like a technical sales role. Basically, I was the person that companies called when they spilled sulfuric acid on the ground. So if they'd spill, 100 gallons of 98% sulfuric acid, they would call, and I would do the calculations to figure out how many bags of soda ash they need to dump on there to neutralize it. I was called for a couple of times when we or our customers had ammonia leaks too. Ammonia, if it leaks, forms a a cloud that's heavier than air, and so if people get trapped in the cloud, they can be overcome, and you can there are ways to move the cloud along, and we had to help people with that. So anyway, I was in the inside sales role. I was going to be an outside salesperson. That role never opened, and so I ended up going to business school. Had a couple of choices. Ended up going to Babson College, mostly because they paid for it, and they, being Babson, paid for it, which was really nice of them. And then I went and worked at Fidelity very briefly in the team that managed the Johnson family money. And they closed that group down shortly after I started working there. But a couple of guys above me in the hierarchy were on the board of directors of a publicly traded company called Geerlings and Wade, sold wine, internet, and direct mail. This was just sort of post the .com boom. So we were at the bust phase. They took that company public in like '96, so well before the boom, and then got caught up in the kind of the bust. And so the board wanted to understand what they should do next with the company. And they grabbed someone who had this buyouts experience through Fidelity, and told me to go in there and tell them what they needed to do with the company. So I gave them a list of 20 things and presented it to the board. And then, my boss, who was one of the people on the board, took me aside and said, "Hey, we just fired you, so you're not doing anything. Why don't you go ahead and do all these things that you've just told us we need to do with the company?" So I went out there and worked there for 6 years before joining the family business. So that's my transition from engineering into business.
Sure. Well, I don't want to leave anything out. There was a lot of history there, which is
Sure.
great. The one thing that I want to ask about and is what did you bring from science to the field of finance?
I mean, I think rigor. There's just when anybody who has gone through an engineering curriculum understands that there is a language around engineering that you have to understand if you're going to get through the first 2 years of the curriculum. And then there is a methodology for thinking through problems that you develop mostly in I think, the second half of that curriculum. And I think that kind of organization of thought process is something that finance in general is kind of lacking. And I think it's where someone with an engineering background can really add.
And I think you were referencing the education portion of it, the first 2 years of science. I think, to your point, that these days you don't go to school to learn financial literacy. You might come to somebody like us for them to teach. And so financial literacy is one of those things that's undertaught in schools. And so that's where our opportunity lies. And it sounds like that you found your home here with the family business.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, like my mother started this business when I was like 15, 16 years old. So I got some of my financial literacy training from her. And, I took a class in economics in high school. Interestingly, that was in the fall semester of 1987. And so in the midst of taking our economics class, we got to see the crash of '87 take place kind of in real time. That was a 35 or so % decline in the stock market in a day, or for like 2 days. I guess there was anyway, that was a real eye-opening experience to see, the breakdowns in the way markets function in a very surprising and very concrete way.
Yeah, I mean, my introduction to the industry was 2020, 2021.
Yeah.
Not as big of a crash as you saw in '87, but still something to cut your teeth with nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean that one was a solid. It's approximately the same amount, but that as far as a percentage goes, but that took place over about 3 weeks. That 2020 COVID decline took place over about 3 weeks,
Right.
where the '87 crash kind of took place in a day. The interesting thing with both of them is that even though you had this massive crash, 35% each time, each of those years ended up with positive returns in the market. So that's something I think that would surprise most people, that you could have years when the stock market declines by 35%, and yet, well, you have a 35% decline in October, and that was '87, and still by the year end, I think it was positive two. It wasn't a huge positive, but yeah, it was a pretty good year before, and then you had this huge drop, but a lot of it got recovered very quickly. It seems, I think, the more you watch markets, quick moves one direction or another often are, reversed quickly. It's the slower grinding, challenges that take time to recover from, or like now, like we are in a time now where we're in a bull market that's been grinding forward, and what we call climbing a wall of worry. There's always seems to be around every corner another reason to be fearful and to not invest, and yet, here we are. It keeps going.
Yeah, our job's always interesting. Feet on the ground and ears even further, or even closer to the ground, I suppose.
Sure.
Well, we could talk about kind of your intro for days, but what I want to get into is the meat and potatoes of this interview and podcast. Sure. I think you have an excellent expertise in investing, but furthermore, what people might really find interesting is investing in space, the great beyond, energy, and then the opportunity in defense. And so those are the three topics that we're going to talk about across the 4 segments. But I'll hop right into the first segment, which is pros asking pros. And just as a reminder, it's myself as a certified financial planner asking you or any one of our other guests who are professionals in their field about their fields. And so this part is going to be mostly about finance industry and our field in general, but then we'll get to the really interesting stuff shortly after.
Sure.
So the first question, and we talked about your transition from engineering to finance.
Sure.
But what do you love about our industry?
Oh, this is going to sound weird, but I really like helping people. So, when I was an engineer, I worked mostly with systems. After going to business school, I worked with organizations. But now I really get to work with people, and I see the difference that we can make in people's lives. And it doesn't matter whether the person has lots of money or very little. It's just a matter of, like, do you have lots of choices that you can work on, or do you have fewer choices? But in the end, it's a person who is giving their trust to you, so entrusting their financial future to you. And I feel that strong obligation to make sure that, I do my very best to make it work out for them. We've seen now, we have about 900 households in total that we serve at Pickling Financial Services. I probably have spoken with somewhere around half of them, at least at some point, during my career. And so we've watched lots of people raise kids, buy houses, trade up houses, approach retirement, trade down houses, travel, do all sorts of things with, the legacy that they have developed, the financial legacy that they've developed, and then pass it on to the next generation. And while it's really sad, certainly, when clients pass away, we've helped them get to the point where they can pass down and efficiently and without a lot of inconvenience for family to pass down assets. So the whole gamut of raising kids to, sorry, but moving on to that next life. Um, and to just have that kind of individual relationship is something that's just really gratifying. That's something you really don't have in a lot of other career fields. So
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And from my experience, and I imagine from yours, there are lots of emotions that go into
yeah,
this financial advising field
yeah,
that we play in.
yeah,
And so I have to imagine that you have to create some sort of consistency for yourself across all of those relationships,
yeah,
no matter how emotional somebody is or
yeah.
how unemotional. So I'm going to ask about your investing. So what's your investing philosophy?
Oh,
What
sure.
do you fall back on
Yeah,
when you've got a client who's upset or any market cycle?
sure.
What does that look like?
I'll step back to where you started with that question. Is sort of like, you know, I feel like one of the terms that gets overused is empathy. And I feel like that's not necessarily our job, is to be empathetic, to sort of put yourself in the position of the other person and feel what they're feeling. Because I think they pay us to be more objective than that. So I would say that our responsibility is to be compassionate in dealing with clients' finances. And I'd say that the difference, you can think of the difference as like what an ER doctor does, right? If an ER doctor always felt empathetic for every patient, I think that it would just completely wreck their ability to be objective and think clearly. And I think the same thing can happen to us. Obviously we're not as skilled nor as as important as an ER doctor, but what we are doing is providing compassionate service. So we help people understand where they are and where they could be. We don't have to feel what they feel. Okay, so uh, back to like the actual question that you asked, like what are the investing principles that we deploy? Well, so I believe that there are always things that are cheap. And in any market at any time, something out there is a good buying opportunity, and it's our job to try to figure that out. Second, I think that certain uh, managers of money have skill. There's so I went through business school, in starting in '99, going through 2001, and I was taught the efficient market hypothesis, and that all information that could bear on investing success is known in the marketplace, and everybody has the same kind of motivation, and the markets are therefore efficient. And I've learned that that's not true to the level that the academics would like it to be true. So always some there's always something that's mispriced in the cheap direction, and then there's some persistence among good managers. They have not necessarily some sort of a secret sauce that will always make their performance better than the market, but they have the ability to replicate their performance across cycles. So, if we have a good manager who's been really good for 10 or 15 years, and we can talk to them and understand what sets them apart from others, it's reasonably likely that we can find someone who will continue that level of performance.
And I'll pick on that a little bit because I do agree with you. But for a lot of folks,
Yeah.
it's all about buying stocks. Which
Yes.
stock is going to do the best today? What's the hottest stock on the headlines?
Yeah.
But I'll ask you to compare what we do, which is managing the managers,
Yeah.
versus buying individual stocks.
Sure. And I'd say too that stocks aren't the only game in town. They're not even the best game in town. There's private equity, hedge funds, bonds, real estate. There's lots of other things out there. And if I go back, I've told several people this story in the past, but when I go back to 2008, one of the things that we were buying back then as much as we could, as fast as we could, were the bonds of the car lenders. So Ford Motor Credit, Toyota Motor Credit, things like that. Now, look, that's not something I'd necessarily buy today. I wouldn't buy it every day. I mean, back then, though, it looked like there were people defaulting on their mortgages, but paying their car loans because they needed that F-150 or that Toyota Tundra or whatever it was to conduct their business. And so they were, I think recently it's kind of been the opposite. I think recently we've had a lot of defaults around car loans, but back then we had a lot of defaults around mortgages, not so many defaults around car loans, and yet those things were beaten up and trading at pennies on the dollar. And we ended up doing really, really well for clients where we were able to deploy money in that way, which, as I said, it's not a way that we're ever likely to deploy money again, but it was something that at the time was cheap. Now, you mentioned managing the managers. Look, I think that works incredibly well in the private equity space, especially because these big private equity funds have repeatable processes where they will buy a company. They have better purchasing with Staples and Amazon and ADP and SAP and Salesforce, and they've managed to negotiate very good contracts. And if you take a company that's bottom line profit is 8% of sales, and you're able to wring out 2 percentage points of their cost of goods because you've done all of that negotiating of all of those prices, you wring out 2 percentage points of cost of goods, and then down to the bottom line flows 10% instead of 8. That's a 25% increase in their profitability without adding an extra dollar of sales. That's a massive increase in the value of a company. And so if you've got a private equity manager who's done that year in and year out, it's kind of wash, rinse, and repeat. Let's just keep going with as many times as they can push companies through that pipeline. And private equity gets a bad name, of course, because some of the time it doesn't work, and there have been some notable cases where they've tried financial engineering instead of operational efficiencies, and the financial engineering stuff has ended badly. But that's why we would stick to those who have an operational improvement process and can push companies through it. And if they've done that over decades, it's reasonably likely that they'll do it again. Now, as far as mutual funds and ETFs and other sorts of managed portfolios of stocks go, I think there's a lot of good, solid, skilled managers out there. I think there's a couple of criteria that we often look at. So one is, do they eat their own cooking? Like, does the manager have the bulk of their net worth in their own investment? If they don't, I'd really be concerned. A mutual fund manager at a reasonably sized shop, probably earns a very high 6-figure to low 7-figure annual compensation. That person should have at least $1 million in their own fund. It's very easy to go onto Morningstar's public website and see if the manager of XYZ mutual fund has more than $1 million in their own fund. If they don't, I'd be really concerned, especially if that person has been on the fund for a couple of years. So do they eat their own cooking? Have they been doing it for a while? And again, you can go online. You can see if how long someone's been doing this. You can go to Morningstar and it'll tell you exactly when that person took over the fund that currently runs the fund. Or if it's a team of multiple people, how long that they've been involved. And if they keep their expenses relatively low. Certain categories have higher expenses than others. So you can't compare small cap stocks to US large. But as long as within their category they keep their expenses reasonable, like average to below average. I don't want the cheapest thing in the world because I think if you get the, I mean, I don't want to buy the cheapest car, the cheapest brain surgeon, the cheapest suit. And I'm not going to buy the cheapest mutual fund just because it's cheap either. But if we can keep those costs, reasonable, we have a decent track record of success. We got a manager who eats his own cooking, has been doing it for a while. Chances are we're going to have some pretty decent returns out of that manager. It's pretty decent returns because like it's all relative. If the stock market goes down 10%, don't expect your manager to have positive returns for the year. I mean, that's just not going to happen. If large cap stocks go up and small cap stocks go down and you've invested in small cap stocks, don't expect your small caps to keep up with the large because you want your small cap manager to do better than the average small cap manager. But if you can stay balanced, usually, small cap stocks outperform large over long periods of time. Lots of academic research shows that, but not over short periods of time. So you got to, stick with it, stay balanced. You can't think that you're going to always pick winners. Sometimes diversification helps at the time that you least expect it.
Yeah, and that formula sounds like it breathes air into consistency. Consistency across all market cycles will, help the bottom line at the end of the day.
Sure.
Now we've spoken to your philosophy, and that's across all of our clients. But now I kind of want to talk about what you find exciting, what you're investing in these days, so that our clients can at least ask the right questions. And so that's when the next topic comes into play, which the next segment. Intelligence that isn't artificial.
Sure.
And so we'll talk about things anyway, like I had mentioned at the very beginning, anything from space technology to nuclear energy, or the opportunity in Eastern European defense. But so let's hop right into that.
Sure.
The first question that I have for you is, what does the opportunity of investing in defense look like to you?
Yeah. It's a scary world. It's sad what's going on in lots of different places. But, Germany and France and the UK have sent many weapons to Ukraine. Ukraine has used those weapons in defending their country. France and Germany and the UK are going to have to buy replacement parts. That's just the way it's going to work. And we are expending a lot of munitions. Someone's going to have to replace all of those. If you hate the idea of investing in that sector, that's up to you, and you should avoid it if that's the case. But if you see, what I'm seeing, that there was an inventory of stuff which is now gone, and somebody has to replace that inventory of stuff, that seems like a place where a profit could be made.
Yeah, and not only do they have to replace it, but we're recording this at the very beginning of March, and recent headlines are suggesting that European nations have to spend a certain amount of GDP on their defense spending. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the NATO countries were spending on average under 2% of their GDP. The commitment to be in NATO is to spend at least 2% of GDP. And over the last year, countries in NATO have committed to going as high as 5% of their GDP, although 1.5% of that would be for infrastructure and pensions. So we're really talking about going from sub 2 to 3.5 on equipment purchases, which is, it's approximately a doubling of the amount being spent. So that's a lot. Also, I think that there's new technology in that space, which we're when we think of defense, we're generally thinking bombs, and I get that a lot of people have objections to doing that, but some of the things that we're spending money on today with regards to defense, we being nations around the world, might be laser interceptors for incoming rockets. It's shooting down, or even incoming drones. So trying to shoot down, we used to try to shoot down rockets with very expensive missile interceptors. So, if Israel is getting shot at by Hezbollah and Hamas, these rockets that cost a few $100s a piece to make, they were shooting back these interceptors that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to make. So, there was this massive sort of, financial, disproportionality. Hey, a $500 rocket can cause the other country to expend a $100,000 missile interceptor. Well, in Israel and in other parts of the world, we've developed lasers, and these lasers can shoot down those things coming in. And the laser shot, the power required to shoot the laser beam might cost only $10. So now we could intercept not for hundreds of thousands of dollars, but for tens of dollars of these incoming things. In fact, that kind of defense was used just recently in El Paso, Texas, as there were drones being flown over the airport in El Paso, presumably by Mexican cartels, but we don't really know for certain. And the airspace was closed for a period of time as they deployed these laser defense systems from a military base in Texas. They deployed these, and they were able to shoot down the drones that were flying over the airport and then reopen the airspace. I think every airport in the world is going to eventually have that kind of laser defense. But in addition, every power plant, every maybe power substation, maybe every critical manufacturing site, maybe every storage facility for fossil fuels, all kinds of places will end up having those because they're going to want to prevent being flown over by drones. And laws will have to be changed to allow the shooting down of those drones. Right now, it's not legal to shoot down a drone. Someone else's private property. You can't, and we have flyover rights across the country. So lots of the government's going to have to figure out, what defense is needed and what laws are going to be required to justify, interception of those kind of threats. But that's there are lots of other examples. We're now apparently, the news has shown that we're deploying low-cost one-way drones in the Iran conflict that's going on right now. Now, one-way drones are a thing that Iran has sent into Israel in the past. Russia and Ukraine have sent towards each other. And that's, they're basically like slow-moving bombs, but they're so cheap that you can send lots of them. Well, apparently, the U.S. has learned, and we're making these things too. It's weird to, we have these unbelievably precise munitions, and yet also we're building these really semi-intelligent devices too. So we'll see where it all goes.
Keep up with your neighbor. That's arms race.
Yeah.
You had talked a lot about too the protection of basic infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be a large opportunity if AI continues to develop in the infrastructure space. And historically, the way that we think is at least the way that I think is getting into companies that are heading on short-term trends might not be our best bet. Now let's look at the picks and shovels, the guys and gals making the innovation happen.
Yeah.
And so the next question is on energy and infrastructure.
Sure.
And then, how does it play a role in how the U.S. arms itself, or how NATO conducts their business in all these countries?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So think of there's a couple. So we know that artificial intelligence has been dominating the headlines and dominating markets for 2 years now. But I think your going in a good direction here. What's next and what else is out there? And you'd mentioned space, you didn't mention energy. Very interesting. You're going to see, if you haven't seen already, you'll see announced before the 4th of July that we've deployed, the U.S. Army has deployed to a base in Utah, a nuclear power plant that fits inside a shipping container. So you could put it on the back of an 18-wheeler. You can fit it into a transport airplane, which is what they did. They flew it from Texas to Utah. They are going to plug that thing in and bring it up to full power on July 4th, 2026. At least that is currently the plan. And I know, there's some showmanship in the date, but that power plant should supply all the power needs for the base. And if it doesn't, they can put a second one there. It doesn't require any on-site expert personnel. It uses a uranium salt reactor, which as the salt heats up, it's a molten salt, right? So it's a very hot liquid salt that flows through this reactor. But as the salt heats up, it becomes the pressure increases, and as the pressure increases, the reaction slows down. And then as the reaction slows down, the pressure reduces, and the reaction then speeds up again. And so it's this self-regulating reaction. So it doesn't require a person as like an operator, inserting or removing fuel rods from like a traditional, fission reactor. These things can be deployed relatively easily. The idea is that they would sit in one place for something like 10 or 15 years before they need to be reconditioned and refueled. The idea, of course, if you're talking about lasers that are protecting your space, you need to have uninterrupted electricity supply. So you need to have your own power because, of course, the adversary would, just knock out the power supply or knock out the power lines before sending their things, whatever those things are, to attack you. So you want to be able to control as much as possible your own supply of electricity. These things, as time goes by, I can envision, one or more at every military installation of the U.S. in the world. And then other countries, I don't think they'll be far behind. They're going to want their own military installations to have self-contained power if they don't already.
Sure. And is this safe for people living around it? What are the implications?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll give my own family example. My son is interested in joining the Navy. He's a nuclear engineer. He's headed out tomorrow to Jacksonville to visit a submarine, nuclear-powered submarine. There are 30-something people on board each of these submarines that live and sleep, within about 15 feet of a nuclear reactor. And they will tell you, and they keep dosimeter monitoring on people who visit submarines. My son flying from Boston to Jacksonville, he will get more radiation exposure in that flight going from Boston to Jacksonville because you're higher up in the atmosphere, you have less protection from radiation from the sun. He will experience a greater radiation dose in that flight than he will spending 3 days on the submarine.
And so the people where this power is deployed at a base are completely fine.
Okay, so I can never say completely, but in the history of the nuclear power industry, there have been fewer injuries, fewer casualties. So all in, health concerns. There have been fewer in the nuclear industry than there have been in the wind industry. And that seems really weird to say because, like, how are you exposed to any problems in wind? The biggest problem you're exposed to in wind is height, where people have fallen from the towers. Now, that's really unfortunate, but more people have fallen from these towers or been hit by falling debris from these towers and injured or killed that way than people have been injured or killed. And in fact, if you look at Fukushima was a horrible disaster, but more people were injured in the stampede trying to get away from Fukushima than from radiation. It's not that radiation is not a concern. It absolutely is a concern. It's just that there are many other concerns too. And if you demonize one particular kind of concern, I think you would miss that. It matters whether people get injured. It doesn't necessarily matter how they get injured.
Sure. Okay. And where that kind of leads us to, we talked a little bit about defense and then how defense is going to be powered.
Yeah.
For the folks listening and for us, I suppose, who have trouble investing in the United States, where they have a political bias and they don't want to look towards investing locally, domestically, and they see the problem socially and politically and economically, whatever.
Sure.
There are opportunities not on this planet. And so I had heard recently, I listened to Elon Musk speak about a data center he's trying to put up into space and how that's going to be powered. I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah.
But then I had heard you speak with a client not too long ago about the opportunities in space. I'd love to get your take.
Oh, there's a ton of opportunities in space. And I'd say, most of the businesses that are related to space are going to be US based. So if you're concerned about investing in the US, yes, you're investing in space, but you're by and large going to be investing in a US company investing in space. And really, it's driven by the fact that SpaceX is here. SpaceX, with their technology of reusable rockets, has dramatically driven down the cost of getting anything into space. Mm-hmm. So I think the numbers are that SpaceX will lift something like 95% of the payload that's going into space in 2026 worldwide.
Wow.
So yes, there are, the Russians probably still have a few dollars in their pockets to launch a satellite or two. The Chinese, certainly, the European Space Agency, Japan, they are all putting things into space, but the amount of stuff that's going there is dramatically dominated by SpaceX. Now, what's going up? So one of the things we didn't talk about is that I went to graduate school for engineering at Tulane University before I, worked at American Cyanamid, and not the lab that I worked in, but an adjoining lab was primarily focused on what's called simulated microgravity and growing cell culture in simulated microgravity. So what that is think of like a cylinder on a wheel that kind of rotates. And so as the cylinder rotates, you've got kind of a plane in the middle of stuff where the falling effect is offset by the spinning effect. Right. Mm-hmm. So there's enough force pushing things back up as there is same amount of force pushing things up on one side as there is falling down. Okay. And so it forms a portion of this inside this cylinder where you get the effect of microgravity. You're able to grow cells that express proteins that are difficult to grow in gravity, but in this microgravity situation, they grow very well. There's lots of other potential manufacturing, from semiconductors to like I said, pharmaceuticals, biologics, all kinds of things that could be better manufactured in zero gravity. So there's a reasonable chance that companies like Axiom Space, that is kind of the primary company that's replacing the International Space Station. So they've already sent up their module and their new hub. And so the module plugs into the old hub. The old hub has lots of modules that have been made over the years by other countries. So Axiom is going to be replacing each kind of those modules into this new hub of theirs, and then they will let the old International Space Station fall and burn up in the atmosphere. And then we'll have this new privately funded, and the current International Space Station has computers from like the 1990s. Like, you think of the size of a computer from then, compared to the processing power in a watch, like an Apple Watch today. I mean, it's just dramatically better, faster, smaller, cheaper today. So, they are putting that stuff into orbit. They will own it. It'll be privately owned. They will lease out space to governments. They will also lease out space to private industry. And then the next evolution of that is to put genuine factories into space, which could be crewed by humans or could be crewed by robots. And they would work on, developing whatever in an environment that's better suited to those kinds of manufacture. So what I mean, another really interesting thing. So there is a battery on the Voyager spacecraft. The Voyager spacecraft, who launched it in the 70s, and it famously has the gold LP record album on it, which, I mean, I don't, half the population of humans on the Earth couldn't figure out how to play a gold-plated LP, or gold. I think it's solid gold, technically LP, right? But we're sending it off into space, hoping that someone will be able to figure it out. Maybe they will. Anyway, that is still beaming back information long past its ability to power itself from the sun. And so you'd say, well, how is that possible? Well, it has a plutonium battery in it. Now, plutonium decays at a particular rate. As it's decaying, it's giving off neutrons, which are collected, and electricity is generated from that decay. So it has now decayed about 50%. So it's now giving us about 50% of the original amount of power, still enough to communicate back and forth. There are lots of opportunities to use that technology. So one of them, like we talked about outer space, we'll think about inner space for a minute. The deep ocean appears to have a lot of resources that we could use. But it's a real challenge to get humans all the way down there and then do anything and then get back before their batteries run out, right? Whether it's oxygen and electricity or whatever they need, it's very difficult to keep going back and forth. These plutonium batteries, which is technology that's investable today, could be used to power equipment and for months or years without having. You can't run a cable down a mile into the ocean. You can't gather enough sunlight, but you could use nuclear batteries that were developed for use on spacecraft, but you could use that in the inner space world too. What are some of the other really interesting things out there? There's a company that is primarily engaged in collecting space junk. At least this is theoretical. They've not actually done it, but they're going to create space junk and manufacture things from it. So it's very expensive still to get, a kilogram of stuff out into space. But if there's a kilogram of aluminum that's already in space that could be collected, reused in some way, refined, reused, reassembled, then that could be a really profitable business. And there's companies that have been developed to do that. Further, there's some really interesting stuff going on with the moon and getting people to the moon. Another interesting potential use of these plutonium batteries is there are areas on the moon, like in craters, that don't get exposed to sunlight. So those areas, we hear the term dark side of the moon. That's a Pink Floyd thing. That's not a real thing, right? The moon, all of the moon kind of gets exposed to the sun eventually, but there are still areas where there are craters and in the sunlight doesn't get down into the crater. And we think that those areas may have water. So significant amounts of ice. So the possibility exists of using those like plutonium batteries as the power source to go in there and mine for the water. Because you're going to need the water, whether it's to, for humans, but, for oxygen supply and for chemical rockets for hydrogen supply.
Wow. That's incredible.
There's a ton of really interesting things out there. It's like much of this stuff is really early stage, not publicly traded. We're looking at talking to like venture capital funds about, these are small teams and, 90% of them are going to fail. Right. But, there are going to be some pretty interesting ones that succeed.
Yeah. And I can't imagine me having a plutonium rocket in my pocket's too safe, or me going down to the bottom of the ocean is too safe, but unmanned at some point might be interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's where I guess you get back to the intelligence that is artificial. I think we will sort of have to use robotics, but I think there is a human desire to explore, and I don't think you can think that we're going to go to the moon again and not send people. Like we've done that, we've gone to the moon and sent people. We and other countries have gone to the moon and not sent people. But I think if we're going to actually exploit some of the resources that are available on the moon is going to be really interesting. I think, the moon as a launching pad to go to Mars makes a whole lot more sense than trying to send a rocket from the Earth's surface, because you got to break away from Earth's gravity. Right. You burn up so much of your fuel in that process. You have to have such a huge vehicle that contains so much fuel to get from the ground to orbit. One of the things that they've talked about is taking multiple tanker ships, essentially, like tanker rockets. So a rocket that would take like 70-80% of its fuel to get out of Earth's atmosphere, but still have like 20% of its fuel left. And that fuel would be used to refuel another rocket that's orbiting in space. And then you'd have to do that over and over again to finally fill up this rocket that then would take off and go to Mars. That just seems crazy. But if you could, if there's enough, if it's chemical based, that's available physically on the moon, maybe we just need to get enough equipment there to mine and refine enough stuff to power a rocket from the moon to Mars. Much less gravity to overcome if we're there. It's distant into the future, but it's really interesting to think about. I think it's a lot of people I don't think understand, but that getting humanity off of the planet has been sort of the unifying theme of all of Elon Musk's companies. Love Elon or hate him, he's got a company that drills underground. If we're going to have humans living on Mars, there's too much radiation to have them live on the surface. They're going to end up having to live under ground, at least at first, before we can build protection from radiation on the surface. We're going to need solar power and batteries to store the solar power. We're going to need vehicles that can move around, and we're not going to have fossil fuels there, so they're going to be, solar powered. We're going to need to get there with the rockets. Once we get there, it's probably not going to be humans on the surface so much, maybe a little bit from time to time, but it's mostly going to be robots. And it might be good to control a robot with a camera and a keyboard or a joystick or something, but it certainly would be a whole lot easier to control a robot with a chip in your brain that allows you to look around and feel what the robot feels or see what the robot sees in more real time, so that Neuralink could be part of it all. All of these companies together are really, that's the theme. Is it going to work? No idea, but that's the theme that ties them all together.
We'll find out.
Yeah,
that's interesting. And all these type of exposures, a lot of them we get rather than going through one company buying that one stock.
Yeah.
We might go through an ETF or a mutual fund, some sort of diversified vehicle.
Yeah.
Just to bring it back to our language here.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think, the closest, the best way we could get access to those things are to invest in some of the, companies that are in essentially the defense sector, because like Lockheed Martin and Boeing are involved. SpaceX, you can get some access to SpaceX through, a few mutual funds that, there's a couple of funds that have small positions there. But most of it's, it's still at the realm of venture capital. It's just, I feel like it's our job to try to understand, that stuff will become important at some point in the future, and we need to be on the lookout for it.
Agreed. We've got 2 segments left, but we talked about a lot of things, and a bunch of the points that I have left to talk about, we've already covered. I mean, So many misconception segment where I bring a conception, a common conception around our industry or any industry, and we debunk it. The first one is that there's a common thought that investing in energy means investing in oil and pipelines.
Definitely no.
And definitely no. We talked about that.
Nuclear and
exactly.
Electricity generation from solar and wind and waves, and there's a ton of opportunities out there. And we're going to use so much more power as we electrify transportation, as we as we electrify buildings, as we develop data centers. Even if you've got to invest some money in fossil fuels, it would be better if the fossil fuels were used more efficiently. They will be used much more efficiently at a power plant. It will be much cleaner than, cars today are very, very clean compared to cars of the past. I own a 1990 Porsche. When I turn that thing on, you can smell it. Like, I also own a 2019 Mercedes. You would have no idea if you were standing next to that car that it was running. So yeah, we're much cleaner, but we can still be a whole lot cleaner than that. And yeah, I get that we might not want fossil fuels, but at least right now and for the foreseeable future, we can't avoid it. So get us to the point where they're as clean as they can possibly be.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then the other misconception, and we talked about space, that there's a belief that companies that are doing these sort of projects are unprofitable and there's no real revenue, which you said is true. That's
for some,
sure.
Yeah. But so the company that's making the plutonium batteries, they've got a marketplace. The companies that are making the nuclear power plants that are transportable, they've got a marketplace. There's the Axiom that is putting the new space station. They've got multiple sources of revenue. So the new space station, but they're also making the new space suits for the Artemis mission to the moon. The same suits will be used by countries and companies when they send people to space. So there's lots of a significant market for that. So yeah, there's some revenue sources. There's not a lot of publicly traded companies yet, though.
Sure. And as you said at the very beginning, there are always opportunities, and there are always companies that are cheap.
Yeah.
Whether the efficient market hypothesis would suggest that this company is valued at what it should be, then that's up to them. But
well, that's something you have to like with a company like Axiom or any of these other sort of space related companies. You've got to take a wild guess on what the market's going to be in the future, because it could be huge. It could all. I mean, maybe 100 years from now, we're all still just living on the Earth, not exploring the oceans, and the biggest thing is that we're using ChatGPT to learn more about the world or whatever. I don't know, but I think that humanity seems to progress, and so my guess is that we will progress to that point.
Makes sense to me. Now let's jump to the next segment, which is horrible headlines, and then we can get you out of here. So this segment, horrible headlines, picking headlines anywhere from the Wall Street Journal to online, Instagram to Twitter to whatever it is. There are a lot of things that we hear about that are really untrue or are misleading, and so that's what we're hoping to dive into here. The first horrible headline, and I quote, the ghost of nuclear past, present, and future, can you tell them apart, ? And the article is about, no one wants it in their backyard.
Yeah, no one does.
But no one wants it in your backyard. But then we just talked about how people live next to a nuclear reactor for a long period of time.
Underwater.
And in a tube, right. Yeah. And there are more deaths from wind projects and things falling than there are in nuclear. And you played soccer when Chernobyl was going off, and you're okay. You're standing here.
Yeah, it's a relatively good story. I was, 16 and playing soccer in Europe, and Chernobyl exploded. And as we kind of worked our way east from England to France, Belgium, Holland, and then Denmark, and there was a little bit of concern from families of the teams that we were playing against in Denmark, but then we went to Germany, and there was many of the parents of the other teams wouldn't let their kids play against us. And then we went to Czechoslovakia. We went through East Germany at the time. We went to Czechoslovakia, and there was no concern whatsoever, which is further east, of course, but less news exposure. And then we went to Hungary, and that was we were within 500 miles or something of the plant as it was. But of course the winds blow east, so so we were on the safe side, which was good.
Very good. And you mentioned not as much news in the Czech Republic, which is very interesting because we're on the horrible headlines segment.
Yeah.
We just hit on nuclear. Commercial space, and I quote, "Commercial space is destroying the planet," scientists warn. And so the one thing that we talked about earlier about whether we like or hate Elon Musk, he's built a technology that's far more efficient than previous rockets ever were. I mean, the recent comparison that I heard is that what if an average American gassed up a Rolls Royce and drove it all 350 miles it could, and then blew it up and then walked home? That's
you could say how far would commercial aviation have gone if planes could only fly one segment and then have to be destroyed?
Exactly.
So what SpaceX has been able to do is to cut now by a factor of 100 the cost of putting something into space. Now, when you cut the cost by a factor of 100, and they're on the way to cutting it by a factor of 1,000, but when you cut the cost by that much, it's that much less energy. It's that much less in materials. It's that much more efficient. So we can send 100 and maybe even soon 1,000 times as much stuff to space. Now, okay, are we crowding space? Absolutely not. Space is a lot of space. There's space in space. So there's enough room up there for lots of things. Why do we put things in there? Well, it's incredibly more efficient to put things there than to try to get done on the Earth what you're doing in space. As an example, we put communication satellites into space. That allows us to transmit telephone calls and the internet and television and radio and all sorts of things. If we were trying to do that with only terrestrial land-based stuff, we would need tens or hundreds of times as much steel for towers and copper for cables and or fiber optics and crisscrossing the country and cutting through forests and all sorts of things. Putting it into space saves the environment. I mean, and it's like there's lots of stories of this, and it's really sometimes you got to get over like, hey, we didn't save the whales because we valued the whales. We saved the whales because fossil fuels were cheaper. It was cheaper to get kerosene out of the ground than to burn whale oil. If it weren't for kerosene, we would be killing whales. So, like, if it is that much more efficient to put those things in space. If we can put manufacturing that is that much more efficient when conducted in microgravity, we can actually put that into space. We don't need factories on the surface that are less efficient, that have a 70% scrap rate, when in space it's a 0 or 5% scrap rate. So we don't have to keep redoing stuff over and over again, using energy over and over again. We can make it more efficiently. And if we can make cancer treatment drugs in space at 1/10 or 1/100th of the cost of making them on the Earth, yeah, let's do that. So yeah, I don't think that there's no good reason to move things into space if it's not that much cheaper, more efficient, and better for all of us.
Sure.
Like, it's too expensive to get started, and it's not in anyone's best interest if it's not better for the planet.
Makes sense. And to just put a point on one thing you said, the reducing costs of spaceships by 100 factorial.
Yeah.
And just to confirm, that's throwing numbers out there. It costs NASA or costs SpaceX $1 billion for a rocket.
Yeah.
It comes back down. It only costs them $10 million to send it back up.
Whatever the numbers are.
To conceptualize that's
whatever the numbers are, and then they send it up over and over and over again, and we get satellites that do communications like Starlink, or we get satellites that do other kinds of communications. There's tons. There's satellites that are up there helping us figure out weather, and now we know. Okay, we're in New England. We all hate the weather reporters, right? Because they're always wrong. But now they're wrong by like an inch or two when they're telling us that the storms are coming. When I was little, in the blizzard of '78, they said nothing was really coming. And then we had 3 feet of snow. Like, they said not much was coming, and people were out on the roads and got snowed in, and then it took weeks to get the cars off of 128. Now, they're giving us like it's going to snow in 37 minutes, and it's going to be like between 33 and 40. I don't know if it's going to be exactly 37, but that's the power of the weather satellites that are out there.
Absolutely.
We're learning a lot about where sea levels are rising versus where land is receding, and it's important to understand, is the land falling or is the sea level rising, and where, and is it doing it globally, or what are the impacts? We need to know these, what's happening where, because if the land is receding, maybe that's because we're taking too much water from an aquifer out of the ground. Instead of worrying about a glacier halfway around the world, we need to worry about that aquifer and making sure that we're not taking so much out of it, because it's going to have a lot of catastrophic local effects. yeah, we need to look at the global effects too, certainly. Don't get me wrong there. But if we have local impacts that we're ignoring because we're just focused on the global ones, we're really missing the boat.
Yeah.
But there's a lot that space is going to open up for humanity.
It sounds like it. Incredible innovation. And then the last horrible headline, and this is from CNBC, and I quote, data center deals hit record $61 billion amid AI bubble fears.
Huh?
And if in a 60-second pitch, if you could talk on AI bubble, because we're filming this at the beginning of March 2026.
Yeah.
We just had a tough day in the market, but nonetheless, AI is prevalent more than ever.
Yeah. I mean, Cisco was, at its peak, I think it was 135 price to earnings ratio. And people were still buying it then. Now we've got NVIDIA at like 35 PE ratio, and we're worried about a bubble. I'd say I'd be more worried about a bubble if this generation's version of pets.com or socks.com goes public. We haven't really seen that yet. I know that this is an environment where we don't see a whole lot of initial public offerings, but I'd be more concerned if companies with no profits, no revenues, no likelihood of having profits or revenues go public than I am, right now thinking AI is in a bubble. Back then, we had a real, genuine bubble. This just seems like there's some exuberance. Is it irrational? That was Greenspan's old term, irrational exuberance. Is this irrational? I think right now we're still in the range of rational exuberance. I think AI could do a lot. It might not. You can still lose money even if it wasn't a bubble. Maybe, you buy a stock and it goes down in value. You think it was at a bubble. I don't think that the overall market, though, is at a bubble. I don't think that there's like a sector even that's in a classic bubble, which is a valuation that's divorced from reality. You've got some companies where there's a lot of really interesting opportunity. And so they are getting priced for perfection around that opportunity. But, Cisco at 130 price to earnings ratio was not priced for perfection. It was priced for impossibility. And, it turned out to be true that poster child of the internet access time was impossible. And, but I'm not terribly worried about a bubble. I'm worried about the labor force dislocation and what people are going to end up doing. The interesting thing that people don't quite, I think people don't understand, maybe they do understand it, and maybe the people I'm talking to just don't, but white collar jobs were not an improvement over blue collar jobs. White collar jobs were a step down from blue collar jobs. Right? We had people who were working in farming and couldn't work in farming anymore, so they became a clerk at the store, right? That's what happened when the steam engine and then the internal combustion engine, made it so that people couldn't work on farms anymore. They didn't want to go work as clerks in stores. That was the best they could do. And now it's turned out that, clerks in stores and then managers of stores and then building lots of stores certainly turns out to be the better career path. Well, now we're seeing that AI is coming for a lot of these white collar jobs. There's going to be something that feels worse, perhaps at first, but might turn into something way better. And I don't know if this is artist or artisan that becomes the thing that's even better. I don't know what comes next, and I think that's that's great in a lot of ways because it means that there are lots of possibilities out there, and human ingenuity is going to get people to, stretch the bounds of their abilities and do lots of really interesting and creative things. But in the short run, the people who are trained as middle managers and paralegals and medical transcriptionists and all of these sort of things that seem very obvious are AI is going to come in and take over some of those roles. They are going to have individual challenges that they may never be able to overcome, and I think that's going to be something that we need to have a lot of compassion for, and we need to be able to help those folks, whether it's us personally or others in the community. But we need to have that compassion and help them identify new opportunities. But in a generation, you're going to say, why would anybody have wanted to be A and then fill in the blank with the thing that's been displaced by AI? Just like today, why would anyone want to be A and then you can say sharecropper, just kind of farmhand. Like, why would anybody? I know there are people who do great work as farmhands. I know there's lots of people who did great work as blacksmiths and machine operators and all sorts of other things. But much of that has been automated, and those people are now, well, those individuals aren't, but the jobs have been replaced. And I really hope that we, as a society, can help people, because the individuals are definitely going to be affected, but then our educational system really needs to help people, get the kind of training that's going to lead to something great in the future. Because it always has, every time. Like, we're not saying, gosh, I wish my daughter had only the choices of being a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher, because that's what women had at one point, for the most part. And the secretary role is essentially gone, right? It's been replaced by computers and email and that sort of thing. But it's not that there's a whole bunch of unemployed secretaries running around. A bunch of the people who would have been secretaries are now running companies. They're starting businesses. They are senior managers. They are consultants. They are all these other things. And AI is coming for other roles, but there will be future roles that we've never heard of. And I would close with that segment on the term computer used to mean person who does calculations, person who computes. That was a computer. Now a computer is a mechanical device, and we don't have what we used to call computers anymore anywhere. There's no one whose job it is to just calculate numbers without the use of a machine. And I don't think the world's worse off for that.
To your point, one of the quotes that I really like is that the impact of innovation is very often overestimated in the short term and underestimated in the long term.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today. A riveting conversation, to be completely honest with you. And I hope our clients reach out and ask about the opportunities in their portfolio for all these investments.
Mm-hmm.
But this has been the second episode of the Securing Tomorrow podcast. Again, with Andrew Betts, Bickling Financial Services. If you'd like to reach out, please do. Anything you want to say as a closing note?
Can't think of anything. Thanks, Jack. This was great.
All right, excellent. Have a good evening, morning, afternoon, whatever drive you've got. Bickling Financial Services is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. Registration as an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisor services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. This is not an offer to buy or sell securities. No investment process is free of risk, and there is no guarantee that the investment process or the investment opportunities referenced herein will be profitable. Past performance is neither indicative nor a guarantee of future results. The investment opportunities referenced herein may not be suitable for all investors. All data or other information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable, and any opinions, news, research, analysis, prices, or other data or information contained in this presentation is provided as general market commentary and does not constitute investment advice. Pickling Financial Services and Hightower LLC or any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or error or omissions, or results obtained from the use of this information. Pickling Financial Services and Hightower Advisors LLC assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relative or relating in any way to this information. The information is provided as of the date referenced in the document. Such data and other information are subject to change without notice. This document was created for information purposes only. The opinion expressed herein are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower LLC or any of its affiliates. Pickling Financial Services and Hightower Advisors LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material is not intended or written to be used or presented to any entity as legal or tax advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisor for related questions.